No. So when it's red, it's good.
Yeah.
Okay.
Say something.
I don't want to say anything.
Yeah, so we're surrounding it.
Good morning. The committee will come to order. I want to welcome our witnesses. I also ask unanimous consent that Representative Obernolte will be able to participate in questioning. Hearing no objection, we will proceed. The first hearing I held as the chairwoman of this subcommittee was titled Accountability at VA, Leadership Decisions Impacting Its Employees and Veterans. At that hearing and at many other hearings over the past 10 months, my colleagues and I have stressed the importance of building a culture of accountability at the Veterans Affairs Department. It's clear that when accountability slips at VA, it is the veteran who suffers. The Bipartisan VA Accountability and Whistleblower Protection Act of 2017 was an important step in the second largest federal agency's accountability journey. The law gave the Secretary new tools to hold poor-performing employees accountable and swiftly remove employees who are not carrying out VA's mission of putting veterans first. A culture of accountability cannot exist at the VA if their leadership continues to tolerate employees that harm veterans and harass fellow employees. A culture of accountability also cannot exist if VA employees are not empowered to speak out when they see this harm and harassment. That's why, in addition to the disciplinary authorities created, the 2017 law established the Office of Accountability and Whistleblower Protection, or OAWP. OAWP was given the explicit task of investigating and making disciplinary recommendations concerning senior executives and whistleblower retaliators. It is broadly accepted that the first few years of OAWP's existence were an absolute failure. At best, OAWP was a completely ineffective organization. At worst, it was a tool used to retaliate against the same whistleblowers it was tasked with protecting. Last Congress, a bipartisan legislation that passed the House, which would have taken away OAWP's investigative authority, was not considered by the Senate. This Congress, OAWP has confidently told my staff that things are much better now and that they put the right people and policies in place. I do not doubt that OAWP has many good employees who are attempting to make things right. I also know that these employees are fighting an uphill battle. Many VA employees I engage with don't trust OAWP, and as a result, they are hesitant to engage with the office. It is not hard to understand why these employees are hesitant. Many VA employees do not view OAWP as independent, as OAWP's leadership reports directly to the VA secretary. VA employees know about OWP's past failings, and the office has not earned VA employees' trust. And many employees who have engaged with OAWP quite simply haven't seen results. Also, VA whistleblowers have other avenues to ensure they receive necessary protections. The Office of Special Counsel, or OSC, has existed for more than 40 years and seems to do a decent job. OSC conducts investigations on almost every federal agency, including almost as many VA investigations as OAWP. OSC also seems to get results. In 2022, they negotiated favorable actions with agencies in 12.5% of its prohibited personnel practice cases. By contrast, OAWP only recommended discipline in 3.4% of its cases. I know that OSC and OAWP have somewhat different missions, and I know that OSC has had decades to work out the kinks, but I'm still left wondering if OAWP's juice is worth the squeeze. OAWP's budget request this year is $30 million, only $4 million less than OSC's. Last Congress, this committee decided some of this $30 million could be better spent by OSC or in other ways that protect veterans and whistleblowers. I look forward to examining whether OAWP is money well spent to build a better VA. I'm also eager to learn about how VA is working to ensure that all VA whistleblowers are heard, protected, and empowered to speak out free of retaliation. I appreciate our witnesses being here today to share their expertise on whistleblower protections at VA. I'm looking forward to our discussion this morning. With that, I now recognize Ranking Member Mervan for his opening comments.
Thank you, Chair Kiggins. I appreciate you holding this hearing today. I also want to commend the work of the subcommittee on whistleblower issues over the last two Congresses. Under the leadership of my colleague, Representative Pappas, I am pleased to continue our robust oversight of the Office of Accountability and Whistleblower Protection, or OAWP, at the Department of Veteran Affairs. Whistleblowers are an unsung heroes of our government that expose corruption, abuse, fraud, and waste. Reporting evidence of wrongdoing from the inside is a courageous task, and whistleblowers often risk their livelihoods to expose critical issues. Their actions are paramount in holding the government accountable, and whistleblowers should be commended for the courage it takes to come forward. VA is entrusted with caring for our nation's veterans. VA employees must feel empowered to call out problems, including wrongdoing. Managers need to be trained on rules and policies so they are also empowered to create and foster an open and transparent culture, which benefits everyone, from the public to staff to veterans that engage with VA. Over many decades, Congress has authorized important institutions which are charged with the oversight and investigative authority, with administering whistleblower protection laws, and with holding the federal government accountable. We have the VA Office of Inspector General, the Office of Special Counsel, and the Government Accountability Office as long-standing parts of that oversight and accountability structure. In 2017, Congress established another layer by creating the OAWP in response to a very serious and catastrophic accountability failure, which is the Phoenix wait time scandal. However, OAWP quickly failed at its mission due to egregious abuses by leadership in the former administration, which were investigated by the Inspector General. Current leadership has had an uphill battle rebuilding the OAWP into an office that could possibly meet the mission established by Congress. From my perspective, OAWP has done a commendable job. It is now staffed up with dedicated individuals who are taking its responsibility seriously. We are starting to see outputs that show the office can and wants to do the job. From our oversight work, we can see significant progress on the investigations side of the office. Over the past year, OAWP has worked to clear the backlog of complaints. Improvements have been made in case timelines and referrals. Now we are starting to see what is possible on the accountability side. We need more fidelity on how VA is implementing OAWP's recommendations and understanding if this work is leading to institutional change. OAWP has a mandate to advise the Secretary on accountability matters and to do data analysis to identify trends and issue reports. We've seen some of the results of efforts in these areas, but there are a lot of areas that would benefit from the analytics work, such as the settlement agreements ensuring that disciplinary actions are being used equitably across the VA, and how the department can further build a culture that values accountability. From reading the testimony of the organizations on the second panel, it is clear that a trust gap still exists between the whistleblower community and OAWP. I know OAWP is working in earnest to bridge the gap, but I would like to discuss a few more specifics about ongoing concerns with both VA and the good government groups. I know there have been questions since 2017 law was passed about ways to enhance OAWP's independence, and there are also fundamental questions about its purpose and how it should or should not differ from other oversight investigations, such as the IG, the OSC. I hope we can have a thoughtful discussion on these and other issues. Whistleblower protection and accountability are different sides of the same coin. They should not be in conflict. We should work hard towards accountability so that employees don't have to become whistleblowers. They should be able to speak up about concerns and have those concerns taken seriously by management. This is the goal we all should be working towards, because that is what we owe to the veterans. With that, I look forward to hearing from our witnesses, and I yield back my time.
Thank you, Ranking Member Mervan. We will now turn to witness testimony. Testifying before us today on our first panel, we have Mr. Bruce Geip, who is Acting Assistant Secretary at the Office of Accountability and Whistleblower Protection. We have Mr. Eric Calhoun, Director of the Investigations Division at the Office of Accountability and Whistleblower Protection. We have Mr. Ted Radway, Executive Director of Investigations and Acting Executive Director of Compliance and Oversight at the Office of Accountability and Whistleblower Protection. We have Ms. Emily Collier, Chief of the Investigations and Prosecution Division at the Office of Special Counsel. And we have Mr. Thomas Costa, Director on the Education, Workforce, and Income Security Team at the Government Accountability Office. On our second panel, which will be next, we have Mr. Tristan Levitt, President of Empower Oversight, Ms. Samantha Feinstein, International Director and Staff Attorney, Government Accountability Project, Mr. Joe Spielberger, Policy Counsel at the Project on Government Oversight, and Mr. Paul Pearson, Vice President, Whistleblowers of America. For the first panel, will the witnesses please stand and raise your right hand, and we'll swear you in. Do you solemnly swear that the testimony you are about to provide is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Thank you. Let the record reflect that the witnesses answered in the affirmative. Mr. Geip, you are now recognized for 5 minutes to provide your testimony.
Thank you. Good morning, Chairwoman Kiggins, Ranking Member Mervan, and distinguished members of the subcommittee. The Office of Accountability and Whistleblower Protection appreciates your dedication to protecting whistleblowers and strengthening VA's workforce. Our former Assistant Secretary, Mary Ann Donaghy, recently retired, but her passion for our mission and hard work continues to be a major factor in our success. In her absence, I'm honored to be here testifying before you today. In 2019, when the Inspector General released his report, OAWP was an agency in crisis. That is no longer the case. We've implemented the IG's recommendations and made significant improvements, which are resulting in concrete benefits for the department and the veterans we serve. We've greatly improved the quality of our investigations and our recommendations for discipline. In fiscal year 2021, 32% of our recommendations were not accepted by VA management. By contrast, this year, each and every recommendation we made has been accepted by VA management in some form, excluding those cases where someone retired prior to discipline. We've also improved the timeliness of our investigations, cutting the average number of days it takes to do an investigation from 251 days in 2021 to just 82 days this year. Last year, we established the Investigative Attorney Division. Our attorneys help us identify issues, properly scope investigations, and provide legal sufficiency review for our reports of investigation. The division also addresses an important issue that has been raised before in this forum, our independence from the Office of General Counsel. While OGC serves as the department's legal counsel, they do not review our investigations or our recommendations for discipline. Training is another major part of OAWP's mission. We lead the whistleblower training required by statute for all VA employees, and we provide supplemental in-person training upon request, and we receive a lot of those requests. We also led the department's successful effort to receive recertification under OSC's 2302C certification program. We recently improved service to VA employees by establishing a whistleblower navigator. Look closer. As the title suggests, this position helps potential whistleblowers navigate the various choices available to an employee raising concerns or reporting wrongdoing. We continue to operationalize the portions of our statute not tied to investigations. Under the advice to the Secretary provision, we have produced a series of reports about how the department can provide better services to veterans who have experienced military sexual trauma. The recommendations in these reports will have a direct impact on veterans and improve available services and care. We also recently conducted our inaugural climate review, which examines the extent to which a facility or office is fostering an environment where whistleblowers feel safe raising concerns. The information gathered will allow VA management to proactively address issues and create an environment that is safe for whistleblowers. Our Compliance and Oversight Directorate fulfills our statutory mandate to track and record oversight entity recommendations. We tracked more than 7,700 individual recommendations, and we examined trends in OAWP complaints and patient care recommendations. We also track whistleblower settlement agreements. This work provides insight into potentially systemic issues that can be proactively addressed by the department. These accomplishments are a credit to our dedicated and hardworking employees. I think they're the best in the federal government. The strength of our workforce is highlighted by our recent scores in the Federal All-Employee Viewpoint Survey. OAWP received the highest organizational health index scores and ranked as the most improved of all VA central offices. Chairwoman Kiggins, Ranking Member Mervan, and distinguished members, I want to thank you for this opportunity to discuss our progress and our path forward. We are committed to partnering with you to help improve OAWP and the department, and we look forward to any questions you have. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And we're looking forward to hearing from the other members on the panel as well, but a vote has just been called in the House that we will need to go to. And so the subcommittee will stand in recess subject to the call of the chair. We will be back. right, we'll resume where we left off. Let's see, Ms. Collier, you are recognized for 5 minutes to provide your testimony.
Good morning, Chair Kiggins, Ranking Member Mervan, esteemed members of the subcommittee, and fellow panelists. Thank you for holding this important hearing on protecting the brave civil servants who blow the whistle at the Department of Veterans Affairs. The Office of Special Counsel is strongly committed to supporting veterans and to helping the VA create a positive whistleblowing culture for its employees. Ensuring that whistleblowers are empowered to speak up about potential misconduct without fear of reprisal enables the VA to best protect the health and safety of our veterans. Indeed, as we all know, whistleblowers are an indispensable resource for oversight entities like the VA's Office of Accountability and Whistleblower Protection, OSC, Congress, and other organizations seeking to promote good government and accountability. The statutes governing OSC's work allow us to support whistleblowers in 3 main ways. First, OSC provides a safe channel for making disclosures of wrongdoing. Second, OSC protects federal employees from prohibited personnel practices, including retaliation for whistleblowing. Third, OSC provides training and stands as a partner with other federal agencies and Congress in upholding the merit system. One noteworthy aspect of OSC's role as a safe channel for disclosures is the high degree of whistleblower involvement in our process. OSC relies on information provided by the whistleblower to determine whether an agency should investigate the alleged wrongdoing. Once we receive the whistleblower's disclosure, we make every effort to respond quickly to those concerns. In fact, OSC's disclosure unit decides whether an investigation is required within 45 days in virtually every case. If the allegations warrant further inquiry, the special counsel will refer the case to the head of the agency, who must investigate and provide a report to our office. OSC then gives the whistleblower an opportunity to review and provide comments on the report. After taking the whistleblower's input into account, the special counsel determines if the report is reasonable and statutorily sufficient. Finally, OSC provides that determination, the report itself, and the whistleblower's comments to the President and to Congress. OSC also provides an avenue for employees who file a complaint if they believe they've suffered a prohibited personnel practice, including whistleblower retaliation. OSC's process for handling these cases differs significantly from our disclosure work in that on the prohibited personnel practice side, our staff conduct the required investigations themselves. OSC has enforcement authority to pursue corrective and disciplinary action in these matters when it's appropriate. And our office has a highly effective alternative dispute resolution program, which also facilitates meaningful, often creative relief for employees who file with us. As a chief in OSC's Investigation and Prosecution Division, I'm especially pleased to note that in each of the last 2 fiscal years, staff working on prohibited personnel practice matters obtained record numbers of favorable actions, including individual and systemic relief, as well as disciplinary action. This combination of enforcement authorities and successful resolution sends a strong message that OSC will conduct independent, objective inquiries in an effort to bolster whistleblower protections and the merit system as a whole. While it's imperative that OSC maintain its investigative independence, there are many opportunities for cooperation with other departments and agencies. Indeed, a key element of OSC's approach to assisting whistleblowers is our robust outreach and training program, whereby we train federal managers and employees on all facets of OSC's mission. In the last fiscal year, OSC conducted the highest number of trainings in the agency's history, increasing our visibility among those who may need our assistance. In addition, OSC has regular meetings with representatives from OAWP, the VA's Office of the General Counsel, and Veterans Health Administration's Office of the Medical Inspector. During these meetings, we discuss individual cases that merit high-level attention, as well as general issues that impact our work. Developing a good working relationship with the VA through open lines of communication has been critical in working towards our shared goal of promoting better government through transparency and accountability. We remain steadfast in our commitment to helping the VA and this committee provide the best possible service to veterans by ensuring that any reported wrongdoing receives appropriate consideration. VA employees are among the greatest patriots in federal service, as they've devoted their professional lives to serving veterans, and of course, many are veterans themselves. It's imperative that they feel supported in doing their jobs without fear of reprisal. I'm here today on behalf of OSC to describe how our work contributes to that important goal. Thank you again for holding this hearing. I look forward to answering any questions you may have.
Thank you, Ms. Collier. Mr. Costa, you are now recognized for 5 minutes to provide your testimony.
Thank you. Chairwoman Kiggins, Ranking Member Mirvan, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to discuss our work looking at VA whistleblower retaliation. Federal employee whistleblowers can protect the government from fraud, waste, and abuse by reporting wrongdoing. However, whistleblowers may also risk reprisal from their agency for these disclosures. VA whistleblowers can choose to submit complaints of retaliation both internally through OAWP and their union, as well as externally through OSC and the Merit System Protection Board's appeals process. OAWP investigates misconduct against senior agency officials, and the independent OSC is responsible for investigating whistleblower retaliation and other prohibited personnel practices across the federal government. My statement is based on our May report, as well as related preliminary observations from our ongoing work, and will address 1, OAWP whistleblower retaliation investigations, 2, OSC's investigations of VA whistleblower retaliation, and 3, how VA resolves these cases using settlement agreements. First, the number of whistleblower retaliation cases that OAWP receives has increased since fiscal year 2020, though the number of other types of cases has also increased. Specifically, OAWP received almost 580 whistleblower retaliation cases in 2020 and 740 in 2023, more than a 25% increase. We will continue to analyze this work and analyze this data in our ongoing work. Second, PPP cases arising from VA employees make up about a third of OSC's workload. And from fiscal years 2018 through 2022, over 2/3 of VA PPP cases involved allegations of whistleblower retaliation. However, unlike the increase in OAWP cases, the total number of VA whistleblower retaliation cases at OSC has generally decreased from about 900 to 515 over the last 5 years. That said, the percentage of whistleblower retaliation cases with a favorable action for the complainants has increased from 3 to 10%, which according to OSC officials has also contributed to longer case times. If warranted, OSC recommends corrective action, such as back pay or damages, or it facilitates a settlement agreement between the parties. OSC cases can have multiple allegations that can each have a different closing disposition. However, OSC closed most cases due to insufficient evidence. Less than 1% were closed due to a settlement agreement, which brings me to my third point. Settlements can be initiated at any juncture in the complaint process. An official within the applicable VA office serves as a settlement official and decides on whether to proceed with negotiations. Once negotiations begin, VA's general counsel provides the settlement official with legal counsel, while complainants can opt for legal or non-legal representation or represent themselves. Following an agreement, the settlement official and related officers monitor its implementation. This process largely mirrors that for employment discrimination allegations. However, according to VA officials, the department does not have specific guidance for whistleblower retaliation settlements due to the absence of a statutory or regulatory mandate. In contrast, VA has guidance for employment discrimination settlement agreements in response to EEOC requirements. Regarding some of the data around settlement agreements, OAWP began tracking them in 2021. However, it does not have a mechanism currently to monitor how long it takes to negotiate a settlement, and we plan to follow up with OAWP about these aspects of the process as part of our ongoing work. However, as of September, VA had settled 71 whistleblower retaliation cases since they began tracking them. Most of the settlements included a monetary award of between $2,000 and $500,000 for the whistleblower, and they totaled around $5.2 million. Additionally, the settlements may also have provided for salary adjustments or back pay. More than 2/3 of the settlements were filed with the Merit System Protection Board, suggesting many have gone through the appeals process. The remainder of the cases were filed with OSC, EEOC, VA's Office of Resolution Management, Diversity and Inclusion, and the courts, with only one settlement addressing a complaint filed with OAWP. Most settlements address complaints involving VHA, the largest of VA's administrations, but complaints come from across VA's offices. Specifically, 59 of the 71 settlements addressed allegations at VHA, while 2 or more cases involved the Office of Information and Technology, VA Central Office, and OAWP itself. This completes my statement, and I look forward to answering your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Costa. We will now move to questions, and I yield myself 5 minutes first. So, Mr. Costa, what can you tell us about the volume of VA whistleblower retaliation investigations that are initiated through OSC? I know you spoke about it a little bit, but how does that compare to OSC's caseload at other federal agencies? And in your remarks or answering questions, can you also just try to tease out a little bit more about why we need both? I know you mentioned about OSC is doing more of the kind of senior level cases, but is there like a finite need for both of these organizations? It seems like they're duplicative in a lot of their responsibilities.
Yeah, thank you. So about 2/3 of OSC's caseload is from VA, so it's a significant portion of their caseload. VA, of course, is the second largest federal agency, so that's not terribly surprising that it would be a significant portion. The number of total cases for the years, VA whistleblower cases, for the 3 years that we have in common for both OSC and OAWP is around 1,225 cases a year, split between the two agencies. And so that number has gone up for OAWP as the number has gone down for OSC. But the numbers have remained relatively stable during that time frame, total numbers. But the total number of OSC cases involving VA whistleblower over the last 5 years was 3,700. So that's over a 5-year span. And as I mentioned, most of those cases most PPP cases involve VA whistleblower retaliation allegations. And regarding the duplicative nature, there certainly is a duplicative nature to these two agencies. We have not looked into whether or not that duplication is warranted or not. It gives VA personnel multiple options to pursue their cases. And there are some subtle differences that we're still looking into as part of our ongoing work as to when it might be more advantageous to go one route versus another. But in addition, you also have the OIG, and in some cases, you also have ORMDI, where whistleblowers could also raise their concerns.
Thank you. Mr. Geip, could you also just address that issue of why we need the two separate offices?
Excuse me, absolutely. So first of all, I would start with, I think this is what Congress put in place, and they wanted to have more options rather than fewer options. So I think that was a wise thing. I think if you look at the past 2 years, and we talked about the rough start OAWP got at the beginning, and you spoke about trust in your opening statement. I think you can see that the trust is we're growing that trust, and the good work we're doing is helping growing that trust. So I think it's a good option to have more options, but it's also a very good option for our employees who want to come to us. If you look at our stats, because we've increased both the recommendations that are being taken, and we've increased the time decreased the time that it's taken to do investigations, we're working faster and better. Also, OSC tends to focus on corrective action, and we have, till now, focused more on accountability. So I think that's another important part. And the last thing I'll say is OSC looks at PPPs, whistleblower retaliation, PPPs, but we also look at senior leader misconduct and poor performance and retaliation by a supervisor. So our mandate's a bit larger, and then that's only one side of our house. We have a whole other side of the house that does other things. So I think we add a lot of value. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Mr. Calhoun, can you explain the reasons a VA whistleblower or victim of whistleblower retaliation would want to contact OAWP rather than OIG or OSC?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you for the question. So Congress gave us different authorities. Our authority is broader than OSC's when it comes to protecting whistleblowers within the VA. For example, they received their authority from the Civil Service Reform Act, the Whistleblower Protection Act. None of those laws give them the authority to investigate general misconduct. The burden that whistleblowers carry to prove their case is quite high. The next panel will be addressing that as they've done historically, seeking stronger protections for whistleblowers. but we have the ability to use VA policies to make sure that even if they don't reach that threshold of a meritorious whistleblower retaliation case, that VA supervisors and senior leaders are not filing policies and going after whistleblowers. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, and my time is up, so I will yield to Ranking Member Mervan for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairwoman. Mr. Costa, the GAO's testimony touches on the settlement agreement process. We have heard concerns from individuals that VA was not meeting the terms of settlement agreements, leaving employees with little resources. To what extent did GAO come across this issue during its review, and could the GAO look at this issue in its planned follow-up work?
Thank you, Congressman. We are actually still in the middle of our review right now, so we have not actually delved too deeply into that particular issue. We do have copies of the 71 settlement agreements that I mentioned, and we're starting to comb through those. We also hope to be able to talk to VA officials that participated in that process, as well as some of the complainants who participated in that process, to get an idea of where the pain points might be in the process. But we have not yet been able to do that work, so we're looking forward to doing that in the coming months.
Okay. Mr. Guy, you're aware of the issue I'm talking about. I know that the OAWP just begun monitoring settlement agreements in 2022. To what extent does this monitoring include ensuring that VA is upholding its end of the agreement?
Who takes care of that? Sorry. Got it.
Thank you. Currently, that's a future state that we'd like to attain, Congressman. Right now, we're just tracking the settlement agreements and whether the basic terms, such as restoration of pay or leave, have been fulfilled. We don't really have, there's a question as to whether we have statutory authority to go further than that. And so we're not quite tracking whether the settlement has been fully implemented or not yet.
Is there an entity that is tracking that to see that it's fully implemented?
Each settlement agreement has a provision alerting the complainant where they can reach out to if they feel that the settlement agreement is not being fulfilled. Typically, the EEO complaints, for example, complainants would reach out to our EEO office, but there's no other office that is designated to tracking enforcement of the settlement agreements.
One last follow-up. So then your office in the future state will have what role in your vision?
In our vision, we would be tracking enforcement of the settlement agreements, and a complainant could reach out to OAWP if they feel that the settlement agreement has not been fulfilled according to the terms of the agreement.
Okay. Mr. Guy, the Four Corners recently sent a letter to the VA requesting data about the non-Section 714 authorities VA has used to take disciplinary action since 2017. VA's response was that it did not have this information broken down by authority and that its confidence in historical records was low. Although this was frankly not surprising, it's not acceptable. What work is OAWP doing in the data analysis space that might give us a better data moving forward?
Sorry, Simon. Okay. So with 714, the Secretary decided to stop using it because it had been chipped away at by the MSPB, the Federal Circuit, and the FLRA. So we are still taking actions. The VA is still taking actions, but it's under Title V rather than rather than 714. However, for our part of what we do is the 714 hold is still something that's important to protect whistleblowers. So even though we're not using 714, we've done an internal policy to make sure that we're achieving the same goals, which is to protect whistleblowers. And then I'll let Ted answer specifically about any numbers, but we don't track numbers. I think that's Big VA does that.
Yeah, no longer requesting 714 holds, so we don't track. VHA would have numbers. We could get numbers for you, Congressman, if you're looking for specifics on 714 holds in the past.
Absolutely. With that, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Mervan. The chair now yields 5 minutes to Mr. Obernolte for questions.
Thank you very much, Chairwoman Kiggins, and thank you to everyone for allowing me to wave on to this subcommittee. This is an issue that is very near and dear to my heart. I represent a district with 5 major military installations and nearly 40,000 veterans, and I think everyone in this room shares my opinion that they are entitled to the fulfillment of the promises that we've made to them when they volunteered their service to our country. So I think we're all on the same team that way. One of the facilities that I represent is the Veterans Affairs Hospital in Loma Linda, which is in most respects an excellent facility. However, in recent years, whistleblowers have emerged to allege that there are supervisorial employees there that are creating a hostile work environment. And obviously, this is something that we want to avoid because we want to attract the best and the brightest to care for our veterans. If we allow a facility to establish a reputation as somewhere that's not a good place to work, then we're not going to get the best care for our veterans there. So an administrative board was convened to investigate this. They did a very thorough job. They interviewed 36 witnesses, 57 hours of testimony, over 4,000 pages of documents. At the end of this, they recommended that the supervisorial employee in question be removed from employment at the VA. Okay, so far the system has functioned exactly as intended. However, unfortunately, nothing was done. And those whistleblowers came to my office earlier this year in understandable frustration about the fact that they had followed the rules, they had raised these concerns, a board had been convened and then made a recommendation that was not followed by local administrative staff. And when we looked into it, and Chairman Bost was great about partnering with my office, VA staff came out, interviewed these whistleblowers with me, and we were astonished to find out this is the 3rd time this supervisorial employee had been investigated. He'd been recommended for termination multiple times, and yet nothing was done. So I met with the director, and what I was told is that the VA doesn't have the legal tools and authority necessary to follow through on that recommendation. And I was a little astonished because obviously in 2017, Congress passed the VA Accountability and Whistleblower Protection Act, one of the pieces of legislation we've been discussing here in this hearing, for the express purpose of giving the VA the tools necessary to deal with situations like this. So we are attempting to close some of the loopholes that were brought up. Chairman Bost, Chairwoman Kiggins, and I have partnered to introduce H.R. 4278, a bill that would give the VA more authority in this respect. But I want to talk to you about why this situation exists and what we can do to fix it. So, Mr. Calhoun, I guess I'll start with you, or you can pass the baton if someone else is more appropriate. But what would you say? Does the VA have the tools to effectively discipline and, if necessary, terminate employees in situations like the one I described?
Thank you, Congressman Oldernody, for the question. So I don't know the full circumstances. I believe the individual you're referring to is outside of our investigative authority, so I have very limited knowledge on that. But I would say in previous testimony, I've heard OGC say that they believe they do have the tools they need to take appropriate actions in those cases. But I don't have enough information to discuss the specific matter you're referring to.
Okay. Well, if you could follow up, that would be much appreciated, because if the answer is no, you don't have the tools that you need, we want to make sure that we equip you with the tools that you need to make sure situations like this don't develop in other facilities. Mr. Geip, the whistleblowers that I spoke with are understandably frustrated with this situation, and they expressed to me something that I found even more alarming, which is kind of a hopelessness that they had brought this situation to everyone's attention and nothing was done. And because it's a supervisorial employee, when a whistleblower raises their hand and says something's wrong here, an investigation is conducted, their claim is substantiated, and yet nothing is done, they are fearful that that enhances the chance that of retaliatory action against the whistleblower. And I would share that too. If I were in their shoes, I would be afraid of that. What can be done to reassure whistleblowers like that retaliatory action will not take place if they come to OAWP with a complaint?
Thank you for that question. I would follow up a little bit on what Mr. Calhoun said. So if wrongdoing does take place, if misconduct takes place, there are definitely the tools available across the federal government, including VA, to deal with that. I do believe, my understanding is the person that you're referring to is not within our jurisdiction, but still I can give you more of an answer on your specific question. And we'd be happy to give you briefings on any of the specific cases in a private setting. But there are other things we can do to help improve the atmosphere and the culture of accountability there. And it's a coincidence that this week we actually kicked off our second climate review, which again looks at the atmosphere in a medical center to see if it's appropriate, if there's an appropriate atmosphere that people feel like they can raise allegations of wrongdoing. So that the climate review is a several step process. I believe that the survey went out this week and will go for 2 weeks, and then we're doing our site visit in early December. And what you should do is think about this a lot like the all-employee viewpoint survey. If you just get not you, but if the medical center gets results and just kind of looks at them, it doesn't help much. But the results will show where there are weak points and opportunities for improvement, and I think you can use those. The hospital can use those to make important changes, and we can also increase our training there and make sure people know all the options they have, coming to us, coming to OSC, going to OIG. But if this was the AIB that I'm thinking about, that you're talking about, that was not within our jurisdiction, it would be up to the responsible management official who was getting that to decide what discipline was appropriate.
Right. Oh, thank you. And I see I'm over time, but I want to emphasize we're all on the same team here, but we want to make sure that you have the tools necessary to set an environment where this does not happen again. So let's work together to make sure that that happens. I yield back, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Obernolte. The chair now recognizes Mr. Pappas for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and I thank our panel for their points that they've made here today, and I do appreciate how challenging it is to change the culture in a big agency like VA. But I will say that after 6 years of the establishment of OAWP, I think it's clear to me that there are major shortcomings within the initial law that was passed, certainly with its implementation over the last 6 years, because we have seen repeated leadership changes, missed deadlines, and lack of accountability, especially when it comes to enforcement of those settlement agreements. We know that the Office of General Counsel plays a role in whistleblower issues, especially when it comes to implementation of these agreements. These agreements are binding and they're signed by the department and the whistleblower, and usually VA agrees to take specific actions to reinstate and protect whistleblowers in these agreements. But unfortunately, this committee has documented instances in which OGC does not comply with agency agreements and takes months or years to respond to settlement offers made by whistleblowers or causes other problems for them. So it's critical to note that since OGC is tasked with protecting the department, it has an inherent conflict of interest, I believe, with whistleblower cases when it's advising OAWP. So to address these concerns, I worked with then Ranking Member Mann on this subcommittee in the last Congress. We introduced a bipartisan bill, the Strengthening Whistleblower Protections at the VA Act. It was a bill that passed the House at that time. And a key provision in this bill was providing OAWP with greater independence from VA leadership by establishing a separate office for General Counsel for OAWP, and would prevent the department's OGC from directly or indirectly advising on OAWP cases. So I'm wondering, Mr. Geip, if you can reflect on that provision. It's something that VA did not support in the last Congress, but can you talk about this principle of independence and whether or not that would make a difference here as we think about some accountability and protection for those that are coming forward with information to help serve our veterans better?
Yes, thank you for that question. So usually when I've heard issues raised about our independence, it really stemmed more from OGC being involved in our investigations and recommendations. So we set up our own attorney division within OAWP to make sure that we're doing our own work, and OGC has nothing to do with it. Because then on the backside, they're the ones, as you've mentioned, trying to work out a settlement in some cases. There's really, at this point, the way the law is written, we have our independence that way, but there's nothing where we're getting involved in the settlement agreement process. So usually there's the complainant, and the agency, and OGC is representing the agency and trying to come to a settlement. So we're just not involved in that part. And I think the reason that VA opposed that provision was we thought we could take care of the other part with OGC staying out of our investigations. So there is some language in the LEAD Act that I think talks about us maybe having more involvement in settlement agreements, but we really think probably it makes most sense for OGC and VA to be involved in the actual reaching an agreement, and then we could be tracking and maybe helping those if they feel like there's a breach of the settlement agreement after the fact.
Are there either provisions of that bill that I mentioned, you mentioned another piece of legislation that's out there, other things that we can be doing to give you the tools you need to do your job better and to improve performance? Because clearly there's been a lack of confidence in the numbers that we've seen over a lot of years.
Well, I think a couple things. First of all, I think our numbers show that there is a little bit more confidence in us because I think we've been doing good work. So I think we continue to get more cases, and I think that's a good thing. So whistleblowers and complainants have another place to come to, and you can see by those numbers that they are choosing to come to us quite a bit. As far as the statute, I will tell you that I think the statute has really good bones and has a lot of provisions. As you've noted, we're a brand new, 5 years, 6 years, or whatever we've been around. So we are really continuing to grow into the statute and operationalize it. I think there's a lot of good stuff there. We're trying to have continuous improvement. I think a lot of those improvements that we've been making don't really require statutory change. So there's nothing that jumps out at me that says we must have this statutory change. At some point there might be, but I think we're still continuing to grow into and operationalize the statute, and we're heading on a good trajectory.
Okay. Well, I hope you can appreciate the frustration on this side of the table, because we've heard similar statements from leader after leader after leader who's appeared before us talking about implementation of the statute and about getting it right for our whistleblowers, for VA employees, and ultimately for end veterans. And so we want to continue to partner with you on that and identify areas where Congress needs to act to help shore things up. So thank you. I yield back.
Appreciate that.
Thank you, Mr. Pappas. I want to do one quick round of extra questions. I yield a few minutes back to myself if anyone else has any additional questions. But Mr. Radway, for fiscal year 24, the OAWP requested a budget of approximately $30 million. Approximately what percentage of this budget is for OAWP's investigations?
Chair Kiggins, I don't have that information. I don't believe that we have that handy.
I could try it.
Oh, Mr. Geip?
Okay.
So the breakdown of our office is like most offices that do this work, OSC is the same way. It's mostly FTE. So the investigative side of the office is it's kind of the behemoth. It's the big side of our office. I think about 80, 90 employees out of 131. So it's the majority of our FTE are being paid for the investigations.
And the settlement agreements don't come out of that $30 million, is that correct?
So our tracking of the settlement agreements happens under the Compliance and Oversight Directorate, which is Ted's other job.
Okay, and then, so do you have a cost estimate about how much each disciplinary recommendation is costing?
No, but we can get that for you.
Just curious. Okay, thank you. And Mr. Costa, data you shared in your testimony showed that the proportion of VA OSC cases spiked in 2019, a few years after the creation of OAWP, and has since decreased. Do you attribute this change to OAWP or to other factors?
I think it's hard to say since it's only been a few years, but there is a appears to be a growing awareness, as has been suggested by OAWP, of what they're doing. They did address the OIG recommendations, and so that might also be a factor in the growth of their cases. And as I mentioned before, the total number of cases between OSC and OAWP remain about the same in the 3 years that we have comparable data. So it went from about 1,300 to 1,200 cases, so all within that range. So it just seems as though some people are moving more of their caseload to OAWP over the last few years.
Thank you very much, and I now yield to Ranking Member Mervan for additional questions.
Mr. Geip, if you could clarify something that is ringing in my head. Representative Obernolte asked a question about a specific case, and with your answer, you had stated, and I want to separate the specific case to a general question. You had stated that an employee was not within the jurisdiction of the VA. Can you explain to me how someone who has an impact on others at a hospital doesn't have jurisdiction from the VA or doesn't fall under the jurisdiction of the VA?
Sure. So if that was exactly what I said, I misspoke. And let me give you the nuance that I meant to say.
Okay.
So VA would have jurisdiction over all VA employees for sure. So if I said something else that was incorrect. What I was trying to say was that OAWP has jurisdiction to investigate senior leader misconduct, and senior leaders are defined in Directive 0500, and whistleblower retaliation by supervisors. So if we get a lower level employee who's not a senior leader and not a supervisor, then we don't have jurisdiction to look into that case. But other parts of VA do, and that's why you have administrative investigatory boards and other places like that where they can go.
Okay, so as a point of clarification for me, in an employee who does not fall in the supervisor category, if someone is a whistleblower towards that employee, this bill doesn't cover that?
It's another nuance. So there's two things. If somebody is making a complaint against an employee for either misconduct, poor performance, or whistleblower retaliation, we would have it if it's a senior leader or a supervisor. If it's a straight whistleblower disclosure about someone or something, it's very much like OSC's disclosure unit. That is usually a situation where we are not investigating. The good example is somebody comes to us and says there's a bunch of cardboard in a stairway at a hospital, and that's a potential fire hazard. That would be a straight whistleblower disclosure that would not need an investigation by us. We would refer that out to the hospital. They would take care of it and report back to us, and we would resolve that issue. So it's a little bit of a nuance, but that's a big part of
it is nuanced. So I'm going to ask this question. Say someone is abusive from one employee to the next employee, and that whistleblower doesn't get the same protections if it's not against a supervisor, or it's just given to a different organization?
If someone's abusive, and let's say creating a hostile work environment, and maybe it's not a senior leader or a supervisor, so it's not within our jurisdiction, there are still other ways that could be dealt with. So that sounds more like an EEO case. So ORMDI would have jurisdiction over that. There's also harassment provisions that, there's a whole mechanism that deals with harassment provision.
In your opinion, would it be a better service to veterans in VA and the entire enterprise if the piece of legislation covered all employees, just not supervisor positions?
It would give us a lot more work. It definitely, if we are resourced to take care of that, we would be happy to meet that mission. But it would be a strikingly enlarged mission. But having said that, there are processes in place for people experiencing those things. And this is another situation where, for instance, either our whistleblower navigator or our intake and referral division when they get these kinds of cases, they don't just say like, nope, it's not ours. They will point people in the right direction so they can go where their problem can be addressed.
Last question. Does your organization then follow up on that?
Yeah.
Document it?
Yes, both. So our whistleblower referrals, their disclosures, we call them referrals, and we refer them out. They come back to us. We close the case when we get information that that issue has been taken care of.
I thank you very much. With that, I yield back. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mervan. The chair now recognizes Mr. Obernolte.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I know I went over a couple minutes last time. I'll try not to overstay my welcome here. Mr. Calhoun, going back to you for a question. In looking at other investigations done by OAWP, it seems to me that only about 2% of OAWP's investigations result in a disciplinary action. Does that statistic sound about right to you?
Thank you for the question. So if I could just expand on that just a little bit to give you some perspective. So if we go back to fiscal year 21, 38 of our recommendations for discipline resulted in disciplinary action being effectuated. During that same time frame, fiscal year 21, 33 of OSC's investigations resulted in disciplinary actions being implemented. So I think there needs to be some context added to that when we start talking about percentages. But to give you an idea, there's probably about 3% of our investigations that result in disciplinary actions, but many times that result in some type of recommendation. We make recommendations for both disciplinary and non-disciplinary actions. Our non-disciplinary recommendations also result sometimes in discipline being taken, but we leave that up to management's discretion as opposed to our authority to recommend disciplinary action, which has an oversight provision in it for Congress. So Congress gets notified if we make a recommendation for disciplinary action and it's not taken by the VA.
Okay, but just to be clear, when we talk about disciplinary action, that's not necessarily termination.
That's correct.
It could be something as mild as a written warning or counseling or something like that.
Yes, sir. And if I may, so going back to March of 2019, we've received 35 allegations of whistleblower retaliation from Loma Linda. Of those 35 allegations, 11 resulted in investigations, and 5 resulted in recommendations for disciplinary action. Of those 5 recommendations, 1 was fully implemented. On 3 of those events, the employee left the VA before it could be implemented, and on the 5th, no action was taken by the VA.
Okay, I don't know if that gives me comfort or it further alarms me if you're telling me 50% of your investigations of my facility in my district resulted in disciplinary action. But you know, the point obviously is even if it's 3% and not 2%, you know, to me that's a little alarming because, you know, if we're telling these whistleblowers who are coming forward, you know, at great personal risk to themselves and their reputations and feeding us information, if only 3% of the time their information results in you know, action, disciplinary action being taken, you know, that's not very reassuring to them. And so just with the time I have left, Ms. Collier, if I could give you a platform, if you could just tell us briefly, just in case there are whistleblowers watching, and I hope potential whistleblowers watching, and I hope that there are, can you tell us how a whistleblower would report retaliation to you and to the VA?
Absolutely. I'm happy to speak about how whistleblowers can come forward with a retaliation claim, at least to OSC. We have multiple ways of filing a complaint. We recently launched a new web filing portal that I think makes the experience quite a bit easier. There's a lot of education built in about what it requires to pursue and to prove a retaliation case under the statutes that we enforce. So whistleblowers are welcome to go to our website and review those materials, fill out a complaint, which is then processed by OSC's Case Review Division. They're doing a very quick, like a few days check to make sure that we have jurisdiction over the allegation. And then from there, the case is assigned to the appropriate sort of programmatic unit in OSC, whether that be our disclosure unit where they're alleging wrongdoing or they're alleging a prohibited personnel practice like retaliation. And from there, they have sort of a stable point of contact, an OSC attorney that they can talk to as issues arise, if they have questions about the process, and we work our way through our investigation.
Right, so if they think they've been retaliated against, they go to OSC, fill out an online form, and the case is investigated. So what is that URL? Is it something that we can tell people, you just Google it?
Yep, osc.gov, and there's a big green button that says file a complaint.
Excellent, thank you very much, and thanks to all of our witnesses. I've enjoyed your testimony today. I yield back, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Obernolte, and also thank you very much to our first panel. And the first panel of witnesses is now excused, and if I could invite the second panel to now take their seats at the witness table, and we'll take a few minutes just for transition. Thank you. Welcome to all of our members on the second panel. Will you all please stand and raise your right hand, and we'll swear you all in. Do you solemnly swear that the testimony you are about to provide is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Thank you, and let the record reflect that witnesses answered in the affirmative. You may be seated. And Mr. Levitt, you are now recognized for 5 minutes to provide your testimony.
Thank you, Chairwoman Kiggins, Ranking Member Mervan, members of the subcommittee. I'm very pleased to have been invited back before this subcommittee. I appear today as the president of Empower Oversight, a nonpartisan nonprofit that works closely with whistleblowers in order to enhance independent oversight of government and corporate wrongdoing. You play a very important role in ensuring the VA properly cares for our nation's veterans. I deeply believe the United States is a land of the free because of the brave women and men who serve in our armed forces. Our nation owes them an immense debt of gratitude. Many know these famous words from Abraham Lincoln's second inaugural address. With malice toward none, with charity for all, with firmness in the right as God gives us to see the right, let us strive on to finish the work we are in, to bind up the nation's wounds. Less well known is what he said next, which for nearly 65 years served as the motto of the VA: to care for him who shall have borne the battle, and for his widow and his orphan. 18 years after these words were spoken, when Congress contemplated adopting a merit-based civil service system, providing effective service to the American people was a prime motivation for Congress. Hiring based on merit would ensure taxpayers receive the best value possible for their hard-earned tax dollars. As it's later been described, the other side of the merit coin is the removal of federal employees who are not providing effective service. When the Civil Service Reform Act of 1978 was signed into law 45 years ago, it included new provisions for removing underperforming federal employees. It also established statutory protections for federal whistleblowers, a first in our nation's history. These provisions attempted to strike a balance that Congress continues to grapple with today: how to ensure accountability for employee performance and misconduct without chilling whistleblower disclosures or enabling retaliation. This is actually more difficult than it sounds, since whistleblower retaliation is almost always disguised as appropriate discipline. Thus, the Civil Service Reform Act established the Independent Merit Systems Protection Board to review adverse personnel actions and ensure whistleblowers are protected while not impeding accountability for poor performers or employees committing misconduct. This administrative process provides a cost-effective way to consider these cases, more so, in my opinion, than sending them directly to the federal court system to be decided. As a Senate-confirmed member of the Merit Systems Protection Board, I considered case after case that hinged on the appropriateness of adverse personnel actions. I was always very mindful that we as adjudicators are fallible, that from time to time facts buried in the record get overlooked despite our best efforts, and that no written record can perfectly capture all the complicated circumstances that often surround personnel actions. Nevertheless, I felt we tried our best to identify whistleblower retaliation in the cases we adjudicated while I was there. By contrast, I'm concerned that our current system does not strike the right balance to ensure accountability for federal employees. This is a concern which this committee has grappled with for years. Both the Veterans Access, Choice, and Accountability Act of 2014 and the subsequent VA Accountability and Whistleblower Protection Act of 2017 were aimed at this issue. As I've indicated, I believe MSPB has a very important role to play in distinguishing whistleblower retaliation from proper accountability. In my opinion, it would be a serious mistake to further limit the categories of employees who have MSPB appeal rights. However, I don't have confidence that in non-whistleblower cases, MSPB always contributes to protecting the other side of the merit coin by ensuring accountability. My experience on the board led me to believe the most important variables for accountability are not time frames, but rather how MSPB sees its role in the disciplinary process. In the seminal 1980 case on this issue, Douglas versus Veterans Administration, the board held that its function is to assure managerial judgment has been exercised within tolerable limits of reasonableness, not, as the board noted, to insist the balance be struck precisely where the board would choose if it were in the agency's shoes. Yet time and again since then, the board has displaced management's reasonable judgment regarding disciplinary decisions. What's more, appellate courts are only granted limited latitude by the statute in reviewing board decisions. For these reasons, I support statutorily lowering the standard of proof required for disciplinary decisions, not just at the Department of Veterans Affairs, but across the civil service. Standardizing relevant personnel laws for the civilian workforce would reduce confusion and contribute to greater consistency across the federal government. That said, there is wisdom in the observation that you can't fire your way to excellence. At the end of the day, the most important variable for any federal agency or department may be cultivating a culture of excellence and accountability, both for employees and for supervisors. In my opinion, OAWP would likely be best situated to contributing to such a culture if investigating whistleblower retaliation was left to the experienced Office of Special Counsel and OAWP focused on the big picture of addressing trends at the VA. In my view, this is what will most help us to do the mission the VA was started for, to care for him who shall have borne the battle and for his widow and his orphan. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Levitt. Ms. Feinstein, you are now recognized for 5 minutes to provide your testimony.
Thank you. Chairwoman Kiggins, Ranking Member Mervan, thank you for the opportunity to testify here today. My name is Samantha Feinstein, and I'm a staff attorney and director of the International Program at Government Accountability Project, which is a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization dedicated to the protection of whistleblowers. First, I want to commend this committee for its bipartisan support of veterans and making sure that they get the medical care they deserve as it relates also to accountability and whistleblower protection, which is what we're speaking about here today. It's going to take a change in culture, time, consistent oversight, and meaningful accountability to change from what our legal director, Tom Devine, previously described as Death Valley for whistleblowers, and turning that into, I think, what we're already seeing being implemented at the OAWP today, which has been remarkably improved, I think, since our previous testimony. But it's also going to take some congressional legislation to institutionalize some of those improvements and changes that we're currently seeing. I do want to give credit where it's due to Ms. Donahue, who's under her leadership, OAWP has reinstated its alternative dispute resolution program. The whistleblower stakeholder liaison has been liaising with the whistleblower group, so there's improved communication, which I think is much improved. And they've been resolving cases meaningfully and operating more independently than in the past. But it's important that we go beyond the goodwill of good leaders and institutionalize some of these reforms that we're seeing today. So I just want to go through a few key reasons why I think legislation is really needed. First, of course, the cornerstone for a whistleblower office is independence. So legislation should ensure that they have full independence, even if counsel are more operating more independently today than in the past when there were interferences with the office or overlap with the Office of General Counsel. Second is there's really no supplement for the Office of Special Counsel's investigative authority because they can litigate for enforcement of corrective actions, which right now the OAWP does not have the mandate to do, and just structurally that would be kind of an awkward arrangement if they did have that authority. Next is it's important to close the loophole to ensure that state license board referrals as an act of retaliation is something that OAWP can stop from happening because then whistleblowers can be blacklisted then through these board referrals, and that can stop them from getting meaningful employment sometimes for the rest of their career. The next is just the level of transparency. While it has improved, it just needs to be institutionalized through legislation. They should have the same public results published like the Office of Special Counsel has. Next is OAWP's compliance analysis and reporting system. Findings should be made public and included in reports to Congress. Additionally, I think it's really great that OAWP's Navigator program has been restored, as well as their alternative dispute resolution program, and we would also like to see that institutionalized through legislation, just to ensure that there's no backsliding in this regard. I just want to conclude by saying there's still hope for OAWP, and I think that a legislative fix can help ensure that there's no backsliding into the past here. I want to just remind the committee, Office of Special Counsel was at one point an agency where the Special Counsel was coaching employers on how to get away with firing whistleblowers without getting caught. And today, with congressional amendments, it is the independent agency that it is today. So I do think that there's hope for OAWP through new legislation. And so I just want to say that we're happy at Government Accountability Project to be a resource for you and help finish what Congress has started last Congress. And I just hope that it will continue to be a strong bipartisan issue, because I think we all agree that the veterans who have sacrificed so much for our country deserve to be supported, and people who commit misconduct and violate patients' rights should be held accountable. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Feinstein. Mr. Spielberger, you're recognized for 5 minutes to provide your testimony.
Chairwoman Kiggins, Ranking Member Mervan, and subcommittee members, thank you for inviting me to testify here today on whistleblower protections and accountability at the VA. It's important to be clear that when we talk about protecting VA whistleblowers, we are talking about the VA's ability to fulfill one of the most important mandates of the federal government: to serve veterans, their families, caretakers, and survivors, and most critically, those veterans who are enduring some of the most personal and isolating circumstances. Survivors of PTSD, military sexual trauma, suicide ideation, traumatic brain injuries, exposure to Agent Orange and toxic burn pits, physical injuries, whether combat-related or otherwise, and other mental, behavioral, and psychological issues that may very well impact them for life. What does it mean when veterans are cut off from life-saving services, or those services are compromised or denied? That is ultimately what is most at stake here. VA whistleblowers have exposed systemic corruption, widespread medical negligence, and abuse within the VA at large, and conflicts of interest, waste, and whistleblower retaliation directly from within the Office of Accountability and Whistleblower Protection itself, all of which implicates and undermines the fundamental health, safety, and dignity of the veterans they serve. That is why it is so important to protect VA whistleblowers, not just because we want accountability for those who have been denied their legal rights, although we certainly do, but because we are concerned about the entire system of care. We are all aware of the historic problems with OAWP that have stemmed from its lack of independence from the VA. From the very beginning, POGO raised concerns about housing a central whistleblower office within the agency without proper independence. While it was clear that we needed more resources to address the rise of whistleblower complaints, we knew that without critical independence, the office would not be able to provide the accountability that was and still is so sorely needed. No internal whistleblower office can adequately protect whistleblowers without being independent of their parent agency, and disciplinary recommendations are only effective if they are enforceable. That is why, regardless of any other reforms, OAWP must have its own independent legal counsel with the authority to enforce discipline without agency interference. OAWP itself has concurred with this recommendation at times in the past, noting that coordinating with the agency's general counsel, at the very least, creates the appearance of a conflict of interest. During last year's subcommittee hearing on this topic, then Chairman Chris Pappas reported that in 2021, OAWP made 15 disciplinary recommendations against senior leaders who retaliated against whistleblowers, but the VA acted on only 5 and only fully implemented 1. Then Ranking Member Tracy Mann analogized, quote, "The fox is guarding the hen house, and it's time for a change." With respect to some of the testimony that we heard from the previous panel, where the agency cites numbers of disciplinary recommendations the VA implements, that also includes recommendations implemented only partially. And respectfully, this is still one of the many concerns we've had ever since the GAO's 2019 report showed the VA relying on advice from the Office of General Counsel severely mitigated proposed discipline for any number of reasons. So if Congress simply required OAWP to provide more transparent data, that would really help determine whether the issue really is a lack of authority, as some have argued, or rather the VA's willingness to discipline its senior officials. We do appreciate many of the recent improvements to OAWP's internal practices, but any such improvements should be grounded into law and still are no substitute for OAWP's proper independence of the VA. We are very pleased to see the subcommittee engaging to address these issues. We encourage you to act urgently and provide OAWP with its own independent legal counsel and authority to enforce discipline against senior leaders and supervisory officials. That is the best way that we can protect whistleblowers and bring more accountability to the agency so the VA can provide the highest standard of care for America's veterans, their families, caretakers, and survivors. Thank you again for inviting me to testify here today. POGO is committed to working closely with the subcommittee on these issues, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Great. Thank you very much, Mr. Spielberger. Mr. Pearson, you are now recognized for 5 minutes to provide your testimony.
Thank you. Chairwoman Keegan, everybody here. My first time. My name is Paul Pearson. I am the Vice President of Whistleblowers of America. If you guys aren't aware, Whistleblowers of America is, I think, the largest peer support network for whistleblowers in America. We work with whistleblowers in all kinds of industries, but veterans is core to our mission. So we take this subcommittee is very important to our organization. Jackie generally comes to these, but she wasn't able to make it today, so I'm here to represent whistleblowers. Jackie has submitted a statement for the record, an 8-page statement. I'm only going to go over a couple of things, and I'm going to give back my time. HR 4461, we believe that it's draconian in its approach to justice, and it tramples on the rights of the employees. And we feel that HR 8510 that was proposed last year is a much better piece of legislation, and we'd like to see that reintroduced. The OAWP, we feel that it falls way short of its goals. According to a GAO investigation that found that while the rest of the federal government saw a decline in retaliation cases, the VA saw an increase. So we would like to work more with the OAWP. In the future, we work closely with the CFTC, GAO, and the Whistleblower Ombuds offices. And I would like to invite Mr. Gripe or anybody at the OAWP to come to our conference or have a meeting with us. I yield my time.
Thank you, Mr. Pearson. We will now move to questions, and I yield myself for 5 minutes. Mr. Levitt, you've spent time at both the OSC and the MSPB. Are they equipped to protect VA whistleblowers? And also, would additional resources allow OSC to better investigate whistleblower retaliation cases?
Yes. I mean, in terms of additional resources, that would allow them to investigate more. I don't know about better investigate. Where they have the resources to investigate, where they do investigate, I think they do a very good job. But it's been noted that OSC's budget is about equivalent to that of OAWP, and OSC has this jurisdiction for the entire federal government. So OSC would certainly benefit from more resources, but they are very, very adequately equipped to conduct these investigations.
And I know that even listening to Mrs. Feinstein and several, you talked about more independence for OAWP, their own legal counsel and whatnot. We have this $30 million request from them already. Is more to provide that autonomy that seems to be several of you are asking for. Is that going to be a larger ask then for as far as budgetary constraints? Is that something that we need to be thinking ahead, or is that to provide them with more independence and authority? The OAWP, is it going to cost more?
I don't have great insight into that. The challenge in part for all of this, right, is that OAWP is a new project, it's a new experiment. So each of these steps, including whether you were to expand their jurisdiction, it's just unknown, right? And so with OSC, there's a track record of several decades of just figuring out what they can do with a certain amount of money.
Okay. Let's see, Mr. Spielberger, in your testimony, you note that the percentage of VA prohibited personnel practices which involve whistleblower retaliation have generally gone up the last few years. Can you discuss this data a little bit further?
Congresswoman, I think we heard both from the GAO in their recent testimony and recent reports that both the number of whistleblower retaliation cases that whistleblowers have brought to OAWP have increased, as well as you're referencing, the number of prohibited personnel practice cases that come from VA employees to OSC that include whistleblower retaliation. And so I think that just goes to show the deep concern and underscore the need that regardless of whatever improvements are being made to training and additional hiring and those types of internal policies and practices, those reforms are not, to this point, resulting in the results that we want to see on behalf of veterans and on behalf of whistleblowers. And so, again, for any of those internal improvements, we would like to see those codified into law, so any progress cannot be undone by future leadership. But we go back to our primary recommendations about providing OAWP with its own independent legal counsel and with much greater authority to actually enforce disciplinary recommendations.
And Ms. Feinstein, you testified that while OAWP may have improved, you believe that the agency's investigative authority should still be transferred to OSC. What about the OAWP what is it about the OAWP that has you convinced that it should not have investigative authority?
I think that the difference is in terms of the issues we've been seeing with corrective action and that being taken and implemented and followed through. And I think that it would be difficult to give that authority to OAWP because their assistant secretary reports to the secretary of the agency. And so the Office of Special Counsel already has the ability to litigate, to enforce corrective actions if there's a finding of retaliation. So I think that they, with the existing authorities that they have and the resources, but also adding that, actually I think they could also benefit for increased resources as well. But I do think that they are equipped to be conducting these investigations. If I may also offer, I think in terms of the alternative dispute resolution program, I know that OSC has been helping, and I think maybe they've even been helping some inspectors general offices with their ADR mediation programs, and I think that this is something that we've seen, I want to say about 70, maybe even more than that percent of OSC cases that go to mediation end up in some sort of successful settlement result. And so it's very successful, but they're a very small agency considerably, and so I think that investing resources into these types of programs gives whistleblowers, I think, more options in terms of what can provide them with some relief and also just speedier results, and it's just a lot more cost efficient for them, so I think that's something to keep in mind as well.
Great, thank you very much. And Ms. Feinstein, you also mentioned, you had, I think, 5 or 6 things that that Congress could do just to encourage some of the work that OAWP is doing. So thank you for that pretty specific list. And Mr. Pearson, just curious as to your opinion too. OAWP seems to have made some progress and being more transparent about its work, but do you have any recommendations of what Congress can do to encourage this?
I think some more engagement with the target audience, so whistleblowers, would be great. Generally, peer support really works when you're really conversing and talking with people. So I think opportunities like that would be really great.
How about Mr. Spielberger? Do you have any comments and specifics on what Congress can do to encourage more transparency?
Yes, absolutely. My fellow panelists, POGO has advocated in the past for shifting investigative authority to the Office of Special Counsel. I think that would also free up agency resources so to make OAWP more of an educational and resource-based office. Again, I would reiterate the need for more transparency with data. And I think that is still a very big concern, that when we see the numbers of recommendations that are being implemented in total, in part, or if an employee is allowed to retire or leave the agency prior to any discipline being meted out, that's a cause for concern. And I think we would like to see more transparency with that data, those numbers broken down more, which I think would, again, send a very clear message to Congress and the public, again, whether the issue is a lack of authority or an inability to actually discipline or fire employees when it's necessary and appropriate.
And I don't disagree. I think transparency is always a good solution. Thank you very much. I am over time, and I will yield to Ranking Member Mervan.
Thank you, Chairwoman. Ms. Feinstein, we cannot understate how badly OAWP was misused under the previous administration. Your testimony acknowledges that the current leadership has made some improvements, but you do not seem to believe that OAWP can ever fulfill its mission. Is the solution, in your view, that unless OAWP becomes a completely independent office, it should really cease to exist?
That's a good question and a tough one. I do think that independence is the cornerstone for a whistleblower office to be able to be effective and do its job and be a safe place for whistleblowers to go. So I do think it does need complete independence. I also think that's exemplified by some of the issues that we've experienced in the past. So if we've seen these problems come up and if we can get a legislative fix from Congress to ensure that we don't backslide into the past, then I do think that there's hope that we can get there and that it can fulfill its mission. I think it's implementing in spirit. I think what legislation like the Strengthening Whistleblower Protection of the Department of Veterans Affairs Act has proposed, and we just want to make sure that that doesn't backslide, of course, into what we've seen in the past. But I think the positivity I feel about the office stems from just seeing the history of the Office of Special Counsel and what that used to be like for whistleblowers, and seeing the amount of time that it's taken for OSC to be the agency that it is today, that is able to do, I think, a lot for whistleblowers. And it just takes time sometimes, and legislative amendments over time to fix some of the loopholes that we find on some of the issues as they come up.
I guess my next question, if nothing changes about the structure of the office in terms of having its own counsel, but it continues to improve its operations, can it ever regain your trust or the trust of the whistleblower community?
You mean in terms of having its own general counsel?
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to answer what I really think.
Please.
I have some concerns based on what we've seen in the past between the role of OGC and OAWP. And I think that legislation that fixes that obviously would be preferred to stop that from happening. But what we're seeing in practice is positive. I don't think it is the only or necessarily most important thing. This is my personal opinion. I do think that trust can be restored with many of the other amendments that we would request, in addition to restoring the Navigator program and ADR, and making that permanent and institutionalized through legislation, because that is something that was removed basically in the past and was recently brought back. And we just don't want to see that happen again, because obviously educating whistleblowers and helping them navigate the system and helping them resolve their disputes, hopefully amicably, between the parties is always a really important part of an effective whistleblower program. So I also feel like there is some hope in that respect. We always advocate for best practices, and we even think that past legislation could go further if you were so inclined, but I do think that what we've seen, at least with the HR 8510 from last Congress, does lay out some of the key things that we think are really important, and it will surely, again, take time to test even some of these amendments and find more problems as we might in the future. Yeah, I think that there is hope with the other amendments. That's a long answer to your question. Sorry.
Thank you for telling us how you feel. Greatly appreciate it. And with that, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Mervan, and I have a couple of other questions. I think we're waiting for one more member to arrive also. Mr. Levitt, can you tell me, in your opinion, why do you think so many VA whistleblowers are distrustful of the OAWP?
Well, the history is a clear starting point, and just specific examples. Word of those kinds of things travels when someone feels like they're ill-used in an office. I thought it was very interesting what Bruce Skype, who I worked with at OSC and have great respect for, what he mentioned, which is that OSC has focused on corrective actions and OAWP is focused on accountability. And if you're a whistleblower and you're going to put your career on the line by coming forward, because nothing is obligating you to do that, you do it because you want to see the agency be a better place. You want veterans to be cared for. And so if you're doing that, if you run the risk that there's not going to be corrective action for you, that you're not going to be made whole for doing what you did, why would anyone be motivated to do that? And so I think that's part of the dynamic that can drive any office. You see it with IG offices also that are very motivated to find the wrongdoing, and that's good, and they sometimes are not as focused on then making sure that the sources of their information are protected. And that's where OSC excels. And so that's where I think distrust can stem from. If someone goes to OAWP and again feels like it's a bad experience, I've spoken with a number of whistleblowers in that position over the years, and that's the big challenge for any whistleblowers, to make sure that they feel that it was worth it, what they did.
Do you think that the transparency that we talked about, greater transparency in some of the results, would be beneficial then for empowering whistleblowers or not?
Transparency can be helpful. Again, my personal view is the cornerstone has to be that the whistleblower is protected. So transparency about what happens, studies show that that's the biggest deciding factor in whether people come forward or not, is actually not whether they'll be protected, but whether the problem will be fixed. Mm-hmm. So that is significant, but people also have to be protected in that. And so having transparency about what happens, what the outcome is good, as long as you also still have your job.
Right. Thank you. Okay. Thank you very much for that. And Mr. Pearson, can you please discuss just briefly your opinion of some best practices of how we can ensure whistleblowers are empowered to speak out?
Yeah, I think I would just definitely have to agree with what Tristan said about transparency and being protected. A lot of whistleblowers, I'll say a lot of people, they see what happened to their coworkers and they don't want to do the same thing. So certainly won't blow the whistle. No, I can't think of anything off the top of my head. Sorry, I'm nervous.
Okay, well, thank you for that. And then Mr. Spielberger, last question. Do you believe OAWP's Investigative Attorney Division will help create its independence, and is that enough of a step?
I think that change is a significant step in the right direction, and that's the type of reform that should be better codified. So my question would be what the legal grounding is for that change, and if that is just an internal practice right now, that's exactly the type of legislative change that we would want to see to make sure that future leaders cannot undo that progress. At the same time, we know that the Office of General Counsel still plays a role in determining and implementing discipline and settlement agreements, and we still have a lot of concerns about their role in that process and seeing what can often be strong recommendations for discipline or corrective action coming from OAWP that then get mitigated down severely where, we've seen more egregious disciplinary recommendations become more of a slap on the wrist or, verbal counseling and that sort of thing. And so again, it's a step in the right direction, but we want to codify those changes, and there's still much more that we need to do.
Great, thank you very much. And I will yield to Mr. Rosendale for questions for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, whistleblowers play a vital role in detecting and preventing corruption. They've saved our government millions of dollars by uncovering malfeasance and wrongdoing. Whistleblowers also help expose and shine a light on bad actors who violate their positions of power and trust. In my state of Montana, whistleblowers played a key role in helping me bring about needed accountability and change that I'm optimistic will lead to improved care for veterans across the state. To recap, Whistleblowers contacted my office in late 2022, raising serious concerns about mismanagement that was taking place at the Fort Harrison VA facility in Helena. After hearing directly from whistleblowers, I started to investigate these issues. One such egregious example included a doctor who was performing unauthorized surgeries that resulted in serious patient harm. I worked closely with Secretary McDonough and Undersecretary Elmahal to ensure an investigation was completed. The investigation led to an incompetent director being removed. In my book, that's what the definition of accountability is. She was removed, and we're in the process of implementing many positive changes. The whistleblowers who contacted my office showed immense bravery, and their efforts will lead to better care for thousands of veterans in Montana. Congress must do all that it can to protect whistleblowers and ensure that they are not subject to retaliation. One of President Trump's great accomplishments was to improve the VA to ensure our veterans receive the care that they have earned and deserve. One of his main focuses was protecting whistleblowers. President Trump directed the VA to establish the Office of Accountability and Whistleblower Protection and signed the Department of Veterans Affairs Accountability and Whistleblower Protection Act of 2017, which formally codified and expanded OAWP's functions. While the idea was great in merit, the VA has failed to use the office properly. So, Mr. Levitt, in your testimony, you allude to the fact that the most important variable for any federal agency or department is cultivating a culture of excellence and accountability for employees and supervisors. In your experience, how do you cultivate this?
That's a $1 million question, sir.
Actually, it turns out to be a multi-billion-dollar question, unfortunately.
You're absolutely right. It's clear, and there's a lot of data on this, but it's clear that how we select managers and how we select leaders within agencies is probably the most neglected thing in our whole entire federal government. And so finding good, career civil service managers who can do the hard work of not just not retaliating, that's good, that's the baseline, right? But also being good leaders and making the hard decisions like firing people when it needs to be done. That's just not a skill that comes easily. A lot of people are conflict averse, and so I think that's where that culture starts. Of course, leadership at the top matters. That's something that Empower Oversight has spoken up about with regard to the recent nominee and now current deputy secretary. But again, at the end of the day, the real building blocks, I think, start with the managers in every office and ensuring that they care about these things and they pursue excellence.
So before I go into hiring the right people, how does the poor culture result in worse care for veterans?
In every way you can imagine, obviously anywhere. We've all been in offices before where we've seen people maybe not do their jobs or other things like that. And when your job is not just approving a report or something else, but the care of veterans, there are all kinds of ways that I've seen it break down. And at OSC specifically, a number of of course, the veterans wait time scandal in 2013 was because of whistleblowers who went to OSC, and then it became clear that it was a nationwide problem. In that case, it was particularly dire, but there were other medical centers where it became clear that veterans were not receiving the care they needed. I've read lengthy reports on flies infesting operation areas. I mean, you've all seen this. So veterans need good medical care, and the number of ways they can receive, sub-quality care are innumerable, but that's
so we have substandard care for the veterans, and we have substandard mental health state, morale, for the other employees that are surrounded by, okay, these folks that are underperforming. You astutely point out that hiring based on merit ensures taxpayers receive the best value possible for their hard-earned tax dollars. The Biden administration is filled with bureaucrats who were hired not on merit, but based on sex, race, and what they do in their bedroom. How does that harm the taxpayer? We've witnessed how it hurts the organization, and we've witnessed how it hurts the veterans. How does it hurt the taxpayer?
Well, in any administration, if people are not hired on the basis of being the best candidate, then the taxpayers are losing out. And so that can range from people getting through who are completely not qualified, and you see misconduct, and that's been a concern since the 1800s. That's when the civil service system was created. You also, if someone is just, again, there are better people out there who are better candidates, those are the people that are going to provide the best service for the taxpayers. And that's what taxpayers deserve, is to just have the best They expect that government, regardless of party, is going to do the best that it can to fulfill the missions that it's assigned. And so that's why merit to me is such a key thing. It's truly the lodestar of civil service and personnel issues.
Thank you very much. Thank you for attending today. Madam Chair, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Rosendale, and thank you very much to our panel members from this panel and the previous panel just for taking time to answer our questions today. We're all here to ensure VA whistleblowers are protected and to ensure every veteran receives the quality care and benefits they have earned. I appreciate all your comments. I know we have work to do now with staff to hopefully put in place some of those changes so we can make whistleblower protections and just accountability throughout the VA system better. I look forward to working with this committee to ensuring that structures are in place to achieve this worthy goal. And I ask unanimous consent that all members shall have 5 legislative days on which to revise and extend their remarks and include any extraneous material. Hearing no objections, so ordered, and this hearing is now adjourned.